Hello, how you doing, and welcome back to the channel. So the Springboks have named their team to take on Argentina this weekend, final game of the Rugby Championship. I'm going to be getting into all of that in this video and why I think actually this is more about World Cup preparation than it is now about the Rugby Championship. I'll get into explaining what I mean by that in the video, but you can have a say down below in the comments section. A lot of debate at the moment about the centres, about the back row for the Springboks and what supporters or who supporters want to see in those positions. So make sure you drop a comment down below. If you can like the video and subscribe to the channel as well, then I'd massively appreciate it. But let's get into it. So I have seen quite a lot of comments on social media of Springbok fans getting frustrated or disappointed in the players that are being selected. And I think now this selection for the Springboks and actually their team selections throughout the Rugby Championship really, whilst they have wanted to win the matches that they're going into, and this team taking on Argentina, which I'll pop up on the screen, is more than capable of beating Argentina, and I think that goes for the other sides they've selected throughout the tournament. It's also about preparation for the World Cup. And when I look at this squad and I look at some of the selections that Jacques Nienaber and those coaches and Rassie Erasmus have gone for, it is a side which is about testing combinations and making sure that they have rotation ahead of the World Cup. They've made 9 changes from the All Blacks game. Ahead of that All Blacks game, they made 10 changes from the first match against the Wallabies. This has been about squad rotation and building to peak in France later this year. So in my opinion, that means that the question is, what are the question marks for the Springboks? What are the questions that they are trying to answer? And once we know those questions, does that team selection then make more sense? So I thought for this video, the best thing to probably do is just go through that team and I'll give my views on whether I think there are question marks for those positions or not and try and understand what they are attempting to do with this team selection. So let's start off in the front row. They've gone for Kitsoff, Marks and Malherbe. Malcolm Marks gets his first start of the season, has been coming off the bench up until now. Personally, I feel as an English voice looking at the front row options to the Springboks, I don't think there's really much question marks there because I think they have so many good options that, okay, some people might say they want to see Malcolm Marks start instead of Mbonambi, but then others would say it needs to be the other way around because Marks has more of an impact off the bench. I think whoever you select in the front row for the Springboks, you know that they're good and you know that they'll be able to do a good job. It just depends which combinations you want, but I think they'd feel pretty comfortable with the players they've got and knowing who their best options are. Personally, Trevor Nyakane coming off the bench, I think in this game could be interesting because we haven't seen quite as much of him. But overall, personally, I don't think there's too many question marks over that front row, in my opinion. Getting onto the second row, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. We all know Eben Etzebeth starts, goes to the World Cup, potentially as a captain, as we've seen him captain the side previously as well, depending on what happens with Siya Kolisi. But then who partners him? That I think there is more of a question mark over. On this occasion against Argentina, Marvin Orie is the man that gets the nod and gets his opportunity. I feel at the moment like Lou De Jager and RG Snyman are probably ahead of him in the pecking order. I wonder whether we might see Snyman start this game. He's on the bench and we're looking to make an impact once more. But I wonder whether they'd see that combination with Etzebeth to try and really piece out who their starters are. And obviously Jean Klein as well was the other one I wanted to mention. Saw him against the Wallabies. Doesn't look like we're going to see him before they name their team. That's happening next week. So after the Argentina game, I think next Tuesday, so a week today, they'll name their team that they're taking to the World Cup. So I think there are still some question marks to answer there in the second row. Quite a lot of good options. I think they're maybe getting closer to it. Could Marvin Orie force his way in? Has Jean Klein not done enough, although we haven't seen him too much? And do you agree with me that Lou De Jager and RG Snyman are there probably ahead of the others at the moment? And I'll get onto him now, but Franco Moster, obviously we've seen him in the back row, but he could fit into that second row as well. In terms of the back row, this is an interesting one because I think I don't have too much concern over the quality for the Springboks, but I really don't know what the best combination is at the moment because after the All Blacks game last week, we saw Pieter-Steph du Toit and Duane Vermeulen come off the bench and have a massive impact, didn't they? They had a real impact to gradually get South Africa back into that game. And so I'm looking at that back row at the moment and I'm thinking, has it progressed since 2019? Or is that 2019 back row still probably their best option? Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with Siya Kolisi. I probably expect him to be taken in the squad and them try and get him fit so that he can take part in the tournament. In which case, is it Khaleesi, Steph Dutoy and Vermeulen as your back row? Quagga Smith here drops to the bench. I think they obviously like him because he's been pretty much a bit of an ever-presence, whether it's on the bench or starting for the Springboks over the last year or so. So I probably expect that he will be part of that World Cup squad. But then the guy I've mentioned already, Franco Moster, who can also go into the second row, is a big body to have at 6 if you want it as well. The two players actually in terms of that back row that I'm maybe disappointed I haven't seen more of is Evan Ruiz and Dion Fourie. They both got minutes but not that much off the bench against Australia. Doesn't look like we're going to see them since. What does that mean for them ahead of the World Cup and whether they're going to miss out? Evan Ruiz in particular seems to me like a guy who has so much potential. He looks like a Springbok. He looks like he could fit in at international level, but I still feel like we haven't seen loads of him on a regular basis to be able to make that judgment. And so I maybe feel a little bit frustrated that I personally as a neutral would have liked to have seen more of him. But yeah, as I say, there are options there in the second row. I feel like they're getting closer. Sorry, in that back row. There are options in that back row. What is the combination that they ultimately go for? I think that's going to be quite interesting when we do get that World Cup squad selected next Tuesday. Let's get into I forgot to mention Marco van Staden as well. He's obviously starting against Argentina. He's another one in that back row. In terms of the backs, the halfback pairing Grant Williams and Marnie Le Bock. If we're talking about scrum halves, I think Faf de Klerk and Cobus Reinert go to the World Cup. Personally, I think they're both quality, they're both experienced. And then at the moment, it looks like Grant Williams is probably that third guy, right? Hendrickse, we haven't been able to see too much of. I believe I'm correct in saying that he's had a bereavement in the family, so obviously hope that he's doing okay. But for me, maybe it is, Grant Williams, Faf and Reinert. You pick Grant Williams in this game because he's the guy at international level that you just don't know as much about at this moment in time. So you give him more minutes, give him more experience. So then if he does have to play a role in France, then at least he's had some warm-up in some big games. We have seen him in this Rugby Championship already. I think most people would agree with me in terms of Faf and Reinert, but I don't know, maybe not. You can let me know in the comment section down below. But to me, yeah, scrum half, not too many massive question marks over scrum half based upon what we've seen and who's had game time and so on and so forth. Fly half, definite question marks for the Springboks. Arguably the biggest question mark actually for the Springboks because it's such an important position. Andre Pollard has obviously been injured, had a brilliant second half of the season for Leicester here in the Gallagher Premiership in England. I think he goes partly because of past form and partly because I'm not sure the Springboks have another fly half like him at the moment, who is that more traditional, controlling fly half, very, very good kicking game. You'd back him to kick his goals when he's on form. So I think he goes to the World Cup even though we haven't seen him. The big question in this game with Marnie Le Bock starting is, can he take that opportunity again? And do they trust Marnie Le Bock in those big games to run the Springbok attack? We saw Damien Willemse have the 10 jersey against the All Blacks. He had a pretty tough time, but frankly, I think that was also in large part to do with how good New Zealand were. So in terms of 10, I think Le Bock is going to the World Cup, isn't he? Is he the guy they want, in those big pool stage games against Ireland and against Scotland and potentially a really tough quarter-final against New Zealand or France? I think that's probably the thing they're trying to find answers for, I think, at the moment. He obviously brings a very different element. I love watching him as a fly half, but, excuse me. But in terms of, those pressure moments, is he the man they want in a real arm wrestle of a knockout game at a World Cup? But for me, yeah, big question mark over that fly half position. Centres as well, there are question marks over. It seems like Damien Dialende and Lekanyo Am, as they have been for quite a while now, since the last World Cup and maybe even a bit beyond that, are the two favourites. Andre Esterhuizen, I thought we might potentially see in this game, not even on the bench. It's Lekanyo Am on the bench with Jesse Creel coming in at 13. Damien Dialende keeps his spot. So centres for me is a little bit more of a confusing selection. I'd have probably expected to see Esterhuizen there, maybe with Jesse Creel, but maybe they haven't gone for that because it isn't enough experience, although Creel's been around for a little while and is a versatile player, just trying to work out what the coaches are thinking. Yeah, I think maybe they're just trying to get the balance right there. I know Jacques Nienaber has spoken about a combination of youth and experience. So I'd like to see Esterhuizen go to the World Cup. I'd have liked to have seen him feature here because he has been excellent for Harlequins for a long time now, gives them something a little bit different. The thing with Jesse Creel is obviously the versatility, and that's the reason I think we could see him going to the World Cup once again. He hasn't had much game time in this Rugby Championship, but he can play on the wing, he can play in the centres. That kind of versatility is pretty worthwhile. And Damien Willemse as well on the bench once more. He'll go to the World Cup because of his versatility, because how he can fit into different positions, whether that be the back three and getting onto that. I love the fact that Colby and Ahrens are the wings for this game. The question mark really when I look at them as the selection as your wingers is the kind of tactical kicking game. And defensively how they are. It was an area that the All Blacks really targeted the Springboks and did pretty well, frankly, didn't they? I thought Will Jordan and Talea had a pretty good day of it in the air. So that's maybe the question mark that I have over the wings that have been selected for this Argentina game. In terms of the World Cup, again, I look at that team and Willy Leroux will go, Mapimpi will go, Ahrens goes, Colby goes, Willemse goes. So then does Jesse Creel still go because of his versatility, as I mentioned already? Caden Moody, it looks to me, is probably going to miss out, which is a shame because I know of how exciting he was. He missed the November tour at the end of last year through injury on his hamstring, which hasn't helped him at all. I think missing out on that was a real shame. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm posing questions there. You can let me know the answers that you think in the comments section down below. But I think ultimately this team is about trying to answer some of the final questions ahead of picking that squad for the World Cup. Whether you like the squad or not, you can let me know. Drop it down in the comments down below. I feel like I've tried to cover quite a lot of ground there, really, and going through all the positions and the different names and whatnot that could have been selected. In terms of the team for Argentina, this is ultimately a team that is good enough to beat Argentina, that will still have to be on their game. The fact that it's a 5-3 bench split, which normally the Springboks go for a 6-2. I know sometimes they do go 5-3, but for the most part, they tend to go with 6 forwards. Going 5-3, I think, is interesting because Argentina are no slouches in terms of the physicality they bring to the game. It wouldn't have surprise me at all if they wanted the 6 forwards coming off the bench just to try and combat what the Argentinians are going to bring. But let's hope it's another cracking game in the Rugby Championship. South Africa will want to sign off their final home game this year with a victory. And I think it's a team that is capable of doing that. I guess the question for a lot of you is this going to answer enough questions about players in terms of World Cup selection? Hopefully that has all made sense. As I've said many times, drop a comment down below, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.